The cold desert passes of eastern Ladakh turned hot in June of 2020 when a Chinese military formation came into the Galwan Valley and created a situation that led to clashes and death of 20 Indian soldiers. Chinese suffered casualties too, but as true friends of Pakistan and having imbibed some of their values, the Chinese refused to accept their martyrs. Remember what Pakistan did during Kargil. Their martyrs. Our martyrs, of course, were bestowed gallantry awards, including the second highest wartime award, the Mahavir Chakra, to Colonel Santosh Babu, who led those troops. The Galwan military maneuver was in breach of existing agreements between India and China on the undecided and undemarcated border, which goes by the name Line of Actual Control, or the LAC. It is not the official recognized border per se, just a working arrangement till the time that both sides decide on a mutually acceptable frontier and ink it. Would that ever happen? Unlikely in near future. And let me explain why. The Ladakh border patrolling agreement might have been guided more by the optics of BRICS summit that happened in Kazan, Russia this week, rather than any real change of heart in Xi Jinping. Like it happened in September 2022 when the disengagement at the Gogra and Hot Springs had happened just ahead of the SCO summit in Uzbekistan. At that time, Xi was also looking ahead at the National People's Congress slated for a month later when the constitution change was effected to make him president for life. The Chinese strategic mind might have thought, like then so now, that softening India and to have Prime Minister Modi in the frame along with Putin and Xi would make India a suspect friend in the eyes of the West. For all we know, it might have been done in tandem with Russia, if not outrightly at Putin's nudging. Whatever the details of the agreement, facts on the ground would take some more time to change. The disengagement is complete. De-induction of troops might follow in whatever time. At the peak of tensions in the summer of 2020, I had engaged with almost all key interlocutors involved in India's defense posture to counter the Chinese breach of trust. Bottom line picture that came out based on those interactions. One, like we were taken by surprise by the Chinese maneuver in Galwan, so were the Chinese taken aback by our military response. The Chinese generals were not expecting that India would mobilize to this scale. Two, everyone thought that we were in for the long haul this time. Nobody even then thought that the crisis would blow over soon. The troops would stay put in that cold desert for an indefinite period, and hence the logistics would be managed accordingly. Three, the Indian defense establishment came together to max out on all military lessons. The Modi government followed with a whole-of-government approach, which has translated into the kind of infrastructure building along India's northern frontier that was unimaginable till before Galwan. You have to only visit one of those border villages or the roads built by the Border Roads Organization to believe what I am saying here. The highway through the Umlingla Pass to Demchok is testament to the resolve that the courage of our Jawans would be matched by the resources needed to keep them well supplied. A look at more lessons. The mirror mobilization of Indian Defence Forces in Ladakh had many firsts. Taking an entire brigade with tanks to areas like Chushul, sling-flying tanks to forward locations using Chinooks, deploying heavy artillery in the Kailash ranges, innovating on durable heating systems to keep our Jawans warm through the harsh winters are some of the takeaways for which we could thank the Chinese. Many of these things would have happened over a period of time anyway. But Ladakh's standoff provided an immediacy which was grabbed with both hands by the national security leadership. The skills acquired mean we are an even more battle-ready army than before. The deployments have cost around rupees 100 crores per day, peaking to rupees 200 crores per day in winters. This was just for the boots on the ground. Remember, we also had our biggest Air Force mobilization in recent memory. If the Chinese blinked, it was in good measure also because the Indian Navy deployed to max in the waters of Malacca Straits and beyond to the South China Sea. It was a warlike mobilization with warlike costs, even if no bullet was fired. That must have been one of the objectives of the Xi-headed Central Military Commission, to inflict debilitating costs during the wobbly pandemic period economy. You know what? In the case of Pakistan, when General Pervez Musharraf sabotaged the Lahore peace process, Nawaz Sharif could say that Pak Army does not report to civilian government. In the case of China, the People's Liberation Army takes its guidance from the Xi-headed Central Military Commission. So obviously Galwan was orchestrated by the Chinese president. If this was the intent, what should we be doing? China sees India as a present competitor and a potential future threat that needs to be kept on tenterhooks, even taken off balance occasionally. This much is explained by the now clear, if unstated, policy of not resolving the border question. From Ladakh now to Doklam in 2017, to Chumar in 2014, and Depsang and Demchok earlier, all fall in a pattern of what has come to be known as the Chinese salami slicing strategy, going back all the way to 1959 and before. Not that India is singled out for this strategy. China shares land borders with 14 countries to its east, west, and north, and has maritime boundaries with another 6 in the South China Sea. Leave aside those in Central Asia, where it has made some adjustments aimed at earning goodwill at the expense of territorial claims. China has standing border disputes with a majority of these 20 neighbors. And you might be surprised with Russia also. Sometime in July of 2020, our ideological friend and brother, Putin, was also not spared by Xi. A tweet by the Russian embassy showcasing history of the Vladivostok port drew flack from Beijing, with official Chinese media countering it by claiming that till 1860, the famous Far Eastern port town was in fact Chinese territory. In 2018, the Chinese embassy of the southern Pacific island state of Tahiti rented a residence for the ambassador. On completion of the term of the lease agreement, the owner wanted the property back. China flatly refused, offering to buy out instead. Apparently, they had built some snooping infrastructure, radars, etc., and did not want to give up on those despite the Tahiti government offering alternative sites. Now, who bullies with a private citizen of a tiny country? Seems only China can. China has claimed entire Mount Everest as belonging to Chinese territory, scaring poor Nepal. And in June 2020, the same time that it launched the Ladakh misadventure against India, China claimed the Sakting Wildlife Sanctuary in Tashigang district of Bhutan as its own. Imagine, the place is lower than Tawang in terms of latitude and gives you an idea of Chinese browbeating of even the smallest of its neighbors. How does India steer this fundamentally altered relationship now? It is unlikely that there is going to be a short-term solution to this. India has shown to the world how to engage with the bully. Even as our defense forces look the dragon in the eye in Ladakh, the Modi government has been calibrating an aggressive economic equivalent of guerrilla war on the Chinese business interests. India set an example by banning TikTok and later changing rules to constrain Chinese investment into our country. Parallel push for manufacturing, particularly in cutting-edge technology like semiconductors, has seen dynamics slowly changing on the ground for China. At 4.6%, the GDP growth recorded this quarter was slowest in the last 1 year for China. Some in China's policy community already see a threat in India's rise, and containing India on the economic side might be their best bet. The rise of Chinese manufacturing in the 1970s was a black swan event for the United States, putting it on the road to deindustrialization, which has resulted in today's Thucydides trap that the USA finds itself in with China. And increasingly, it seems like a losing battle. The Chinese thinkers realize if India rises, they might be facing their black swan with us at this moment. Maybe all this was also weighing heavy on the Chinese military minds to agree for the border detente. economic survey of this year spoke of tackling the adverse balance of trade situation where India imports much more than it exports to China by turning Chinese trade with India into FDI. The suggestion was endorsed by government's think tank, the Niti Aayog. Industry bodies like the CII have been demanding a review of regulation to ease Chinese investments and visas to allow faster infusion of both capital and expertise. This week's detent should help mobilize opinion in favor of such a move. While a $5 trillion economy is a low-hanging fruit, we must think bigger and see ourselves as the second largest economy in the world by 2047. Prime Minister Narendra Modi understands that, thus putting India as a developed country by our 100th year of independence as one of the national objectives in his August 15 speech from the Red Fort last year. Between the Europe war and the Taiwan crisis and what's happening in the Middle East, global forces are aligning in a manner that it would not be easy for the Chinese to be the engine of growth for the world on a sustainable basis. The diversification makes India the right candidate at the time. We must take the tide. Moving on.